Hey guys, welcome back to the Full Motion YouTube channel. I'm Tom and I've got Chris with me today. And what we're going to be talking about briefly is the difference between external rotation and internal rotation, and a couple of differences that you'll find in regards to strength training or barbell lifting. So there's like a bit of a debate between whether external rotation or internal rotation is better or worse. And pretty much here, just like the next 5-10 minutes or so, just going to talk about what they actually do for the body and why internal rotation might be a little bit more beneficial for the actual pushing aspects of powerlifting. Because a lot of it is often technical differences. Some people find that leaning into one more than the other makes them feel better. But at the end of the day, the body will generally find a way to create internal rotation. So when it comes to moving our body through space, or like moving our body through environment, or like space, pretty much here just means like moving our body just like throughout. What you can kind of divide it into is the direction that's pushing. So external rotation, if you imagine like on the left here, with the little guy there in green, it's very much a moving forward in space kind of motion. When we externally rotate our ribs, externally rotate our pelvis, externally rotate our limbs, generally it's going to push our body forwards in space, and it's going to contract the musculature on our posterior aspects. So our back muscles, our hip muscles, our limb muscles, all those kinds of things. So breathing in generally contributes to this. When we fill up with air, the air will go into our chest and we'll start to externally rotate everywhere. And like, generally speaking, you'll also often find that the air will go into the front of our body. So it will go into our stomach, all those kinds of things. Internal rotation is the complete opposite. So internal rotation is something that more so moves us backwards in space. So you can also think of this as something like pushing yourself backwards away. So if you look at the guy on the right, he looks like he's breathing out, forcefully trying to push himself away from something here. So if you compare the difference between the two on the sides, like if you're trying to push yourself backwards, you're going to be breathing out quite forcefully. And sometimes, like if you sit here and practice it now, if you breathe out as hard as you can, you'll probably feel like the front side of your body will contract. So this might be more like your pec muscles, your ab muscles, your oblique muscles, those kinds of things. So there's a bit of a difference between the two. And this is generally as like a global systemic kind of way the body moves. But we can apply the same premise when it comes to powerlifting or powerlifts. So the biggest thing about powerlifting is like the hard bit isn't often getting into position. It's getting out of that position to then stand up or push away. So if you remember back to the previous slide, I'll even go back to it now. Internal rotation moves us backwards in space, but it also teaches us to push away from something. Like if we're pushing backwards, we're contracting all those big internal rotation muscles on the front of our body. So it's the exact same thing when it comes to powerlifts. It often just comes down to how we interpret that pushing something away. So in squat, for example, when we're standing up out of the squat, often we're thinking about pushing the ground away. In bench press, if we're like bar is on our chest, we're the press command, and we get press commands, we're going to be pushing that bar away from our chest or pushing ourselves back away into the bench. And then the deadlift is hanging onto the bar and pushing the ground away. So most of the ways you look at it, the hard part of powerlifting, we have to be pushing. We're pushing something away from us. So therefore, because of that, internal rotation is going to be the thing that the body's trying to use. If we're pushing something away from us, our body will find some way, shape, or form in some aspect of the body, whether that's the limbs, the torso, the hips, the back, wherever it is, the head sometimes, it's going to find a way to internally rotate the body to create that pushing power. And I think that's the most interesting thing as well, is because often, like even if you do externally rotate so hard, the body will tend to find a way to internally rotate back here. So the knee valgus thing is always a good example of this. Like if we externally rotate hard on the way down to the squat, then you see a big dive in of the knees coming in as we push out. That's the body being smarter than us and deciding that it needs to internally rotate to push us out of the squat. And I guess in all this, like external rotation isn't a bad thing by any means. Like external rotation can, like depending on your technique, actually help you get into better positions. So for some people, externally rotating on the way down into bench and then internally rotating helps them get into a much, much better bench position. So external rotation isn't like obsolete. Like there's a big use to it still. But the main point of what we're trying to get across is that internal rotation helps you create pushing power with powers. So Chris will take you through a little bit some more practical applications and experiences he's had with it.
So I guess looking at getting your clients into more of an externally rotated position can help them create a lot more movement options, which I think is going to be really beneficial for them, because like Tom was saying, external rotation helps you get into some positions, but we need to make sure that we're teaching our clients how to internally rotate it, or how to use that to their advantage, so that way they can, I guess, create a force that will let them get out of those positions. So I guess a really good way of doing that is using an exercise like a Spanish squat with a ball squeeze, for example, because that allows us to get into a position like the squat, and then really focusing on that internal rotation focus with that ball squeeze to help propel us upwards. And then I guess putting an application for the bench press as well. What you'll find is that, I guess, starting off bench press without learning too much technique, you can find that, I guess, the chest will collapse, which is leading us into that internal rotation strategy where we're trying to push things away and fall backwards, I guess. But I guess putting ourselves into a position where we are able to get into that externally rotated position on the bench press, like Tom was saying, to give us that advantage of a movement strategy, and then pressing into IR is a really good way of, I guess, helping us benefit the bench press there.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you have anything else?
Yeah. So yeah, like Chris said, it's all really important to make sure that we're finding a way to internally rotate. Especially if we are moving into an externally rotating position for us, like the bench press. So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. But yeah, this has been a very short introduction to the difference between IR and ER. Thanks for listening.